Thank you, Howard. We were talking before the service began. When Howard got here, he knew he had security today. I guess, somehow overlooked the fact that he had special music, and so he got here dressed for security. Looks in the bulletin, sees he's singing the solo today. So, I just hate that he didn't have more time to practice, and so next time maybe he can. I like having access to the internet. I like having the ability to send and receive email. And email is kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it? Those of you who have it, it's nice to be able to have it, but it's kind of aggravating sometimes. One of the things that's aggravating about email are forwards. And some of you, well, maybe some of you are this person, but at the very least you know this person that has yet to meet the email that's not worthy of forwarding. You know those people. Every time they get something, they're going to pass it on. And one of the things that consistently gets forwarded around the internet through email are jokes. And it's interesting. You'll get one maybe this week, and you may get the same joke from a couple of other folks, and then you won't hear it or see it for a period of months. But then 6, 8, 10 months later, all of a sudden, it's making the rounds again throughout the internet. And so some of these jokes we've seen over and over again. One of them I've seen a number of times. Maybe you've read it or heard it before. It's an old joke. But it's about this mother. She's got 2 little boys, and these little brothers they're just little terrors. And she's done everything she possibly can to rein them in, to bring discipline and respect and obedience into their lives, but nothing is working. And one day she's lamenting her parental struggles with a friend, and she's talking about how she's tried everything, but nothing has worked. And the friend says, you know what, I've got a little boy, and I was having some of those same issues, but I took my son to see the pastor one day, and I'm not sure exactly what he said to him, but whatever it did, it's made a colossal difference. It was literally the difference between night and day. He is so obedient, so respectful. He's a different little boy. Upon hearing this, the mother thinks, you know, I've got nothing to lose. And so she calls the church, she speaks with the pastor, she makes an appointment. And on the appointed day and the appointed time, she takes her little boys to the church, and she's going to leave them there with the pastor for about an hour and come back and pick them up later. And so the pastor takes them towards his office, and one of them he leaves in the outer reception area and takes the other one on into his study, has him sit down in front of the desk. The pastor sits down behind his desk, and he begins to exchange pleasantries with this little boy, asking him about school and about baseball and all kinds of stuff. And after this exchange of pleasantries, he changes tone very distinctly, and he looks the boy dead in the eye, and he says, "Where is God?" The little boy is kind of taken aback by the question. It's a little surprising. I don't know what you say to this, is what he's thinking. And so he doesn't say anything. And in response, the pastor asks the question a little bit louder, "Where is God?" At this point, the boy is really feeling uncomfortable, and he's looking around the office to see, might the answer be somewhere hanging on the wall, but he says nothing. And in response to the silence, the pastor asks a third and final time, much louder, "Little boy, where is God?" At this point, the boy is petrified. He jumps up, he runs out into the lobby, he grabs his brother, and he says, "Listen, we got to get out of here. They've lost God. They're trying to pin it on us." It's an old joke, but it asks a simple question. Where is God? You know, if we're honest, there's probably more than a few here today that in your heart, you're kind of wondering the same thing. Where is He? And you recognize that it hasn't always been this way. I mean, there was this season of time in your life, perhaps many years ago, when the Lord was so close. Things were so fresh. Your commitment was so marked by zeal and enthusiasm. The passion was so intense. The intimacy was so close. But you look back on that time. You look back on those feelings, and you'd say, it's changed. It's different. Somehow, in some way, it feels as though I've lost the Lord. The passion has diminished. The intimacy is gone, and things feel very stale, lifeless. The vitality is gone. You feel kind of like a flat Coke. The fizz is gone. Now, this morning we're continuing in a series of messages that I've entitled, "When the Fizz is Gone." And maybe over the past numbers of weeks, you've been thinking, not simply during this time, but even away from here, about some of the things that we've been talking about. And more and increasingly, you're coming to grips with the realization, that's kind of where I am. That's how things are right now between me and the Lord. And when you get to that point and you get to that place where the fizz is gone, and you're asking things and saying, it feels like somehow I have lost the Lord, you've really only got two options. Really only two options. The first option is to say, you know what, that's just kind of how it is. The emptiness, the staleness, the lack of freshness, the absence of vitality, you just decide, that's okay, I can live with that. The other option is to say, you know what, I recognize that that's how things are, and I don't like it, and I want to do something about it. And if you're here today and you're thinking, hey, I'd like to do something about it, your next question is reasonable. What then do I do? Where do I start? How do I get things to start changing, to get back to what I once had? Jesus, I believe, answers that question for us in one little verse of Scripture. If you would look with me in your Bibles today to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to be in verse 6. At this point, Jesus' earthly ministry is still in the early stages of it. That being said, he's performed a number of miracles, and he's going around and he's teaching with amazing authority, and people are taking note of him. And as they're taking note and witnessing all of these things, they're starting to tell other people about him. Jesus really has become a celebrity of the first century at this point. And when he goes from place to place, crowds are showing up of increasing number. At the very least, people are curious. What might he do next? What is it that he's going to say? And so as he's going from place to place, these crowds are getting quite large. Such was the case on the day when we have these words spoken by Jesus, recorded by Matthew. The crowd was so great that day, as he begins to talk, folks can't see him, they can't hear him. And so Jesus steps up on the side of a mountain, essentially making a natural platform so that people can see him and consequently hear him. And he shares what we've come to know as the Sermon on the Mount. And as he is sharing this message and as he's teaching all these various truths, there are a number of sections that we can easily divide what he says into. And starting in verse 3, he begins to share what we commonly refer to as the Beatitudes. And 9 times Jesus says, blessed are those. He said, blessed are the poor in spirit, those who mourn, blessed are the meek, blessed are those that are merciful, those that are persecuted for righteousness' sake. And so he's saying, blessed are those, blessed are those, blessed are those, blessed are those. But of particular concern is what he says in verse 6, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. 9 times Jesus uses the same word, blessed. And that word that he uses there, that Mark records in Greek, that's translated in English as blessed, literally means happy, fortunate, free from care. And in many ways, it's as if Jesus is giving this series of recipe ingredients. These are the ways that you can experience freedom from care. These are ways that you can become fortunate. These are ways that you can experience genuine happiness. You can be free from care and anxiety by hungering and thirsting for righteousness. Well, the most noteworthy word that Jesus uses in that verse is the term righteousness. It's a term that we float around right often in Sunday school and sometimes makes its way into the songs that we sing. That being said, we're familiar with it, but oftentimes we don't know exactly what it means. It's a term that literally means right standing, but it's a term that conveys the idea of one thing being affixed to and adjusted to another. It would be like me saying, for example, okay, according to my watch, it is 11:06. So everybody look at your watches, and I want you to synchronize your watches so that we're all on the same page. 11:06. You are adjusting what you have to something else. In this instance, you're adjusting your watches, synchronizing them to mine. Based on what Jesus says, though, what he's talking about is adjusting our lives, lining up our lives to his standards, to his ways, his dreams, his pursuits, his will, his plans. And taken together, Jesus is saying that those who find happiness, those that experience freedom from care, are those who hunger for, who yearn for, aligning their lives up to match with his. They hunger after his standards. They thirst for him. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. Now, those terms hunger and thirst obviously convey the idea of craving, longing for, seeking out, and pursuing. Jesus says that those who hunger and thirst after God's standards, who hunger and thirst and pursue to align their lives up to him, he says they will be filled. Now, the word that's translated there as filled literally means to satisfy. If you hunger and thirst after the Lord, he will satisfy that desire. Let me share with you a very simple statement. You can have as much of God as you really want. Now, let that thought sink in for just a moment. You can have as much of God as you really want. For some, hearing that simple thought yields troublesome feelings, because you recognize that at this very moment you have as much of him as you really want. And perhaps you recognize it's not that much. You can have as much of him as you really want, because when you hunger and thirst for him, whatever that level of desire is, Jesus says he will satisfy that desire. There's no one who could say at all in truth, I really want more of God, but this is kind of the level. This is kind of the peak that I've been able to reach. I can't go any further than this. Because the truth is, there's always more to be had. There's always more to be experienced. There's another touch. There's another lesson. There's another encounter. There's another experience of opportunity. Another experience of conviction. Another touch. There's always more. This idea of hungering and thirsting, spiritually hungering and thirsting, if we're honest, most of us have no idea exactly what in the world that is. After all, hungering and thirsting, those aren't pleasant feelings, are they? I mean, if you're hungry, you want to fix that. If you're thirsty, you want to fix that. Those are uncomfortable feelings. And truth be told, we seek to avoid anything in life that yields anything other than comfort. We want pews that are comfortable. We design our churches, we design our homes, we design even our offices, even our car seats, and even the gear shift on our cars in keeping with that which is comfortable. Really hungering and thirsting after God, that's not comfortable. And for many of us, it consequently is not on our radar. But Jesus is saying that if you are willing to be uncomfortable with where you are, if you are willing to hunger and to thirst after him, that is a desire, that is a hunger, and that is a thirst that he will satisfy. You can have as much of him as you really want. I'd have you note, though, that the words that Mark records here, spoken by Jesus, translated as hunger and thirst. In Greek, these verbs are present tense. And in Greek, that means it's ongoing action. So it's speaking of not simply something that is presently occurring, but something that continues to occur. Continuously hungering, continuously thirsting. It conveys the idea of pursuit but never full attainment. heading towards the destination but never fully arriving. Jesus says that those that have this, that continue to hunger and continue to thirst, well, He'll satisfy that. You will be filled. You'll find the one that you seek. You'll experience what you are looking for. But as you hunger and as you thirst for Him, as He satisfies, again, this is present, ongoing action, the more you'll hunger and the more you'll thirst. I don't know if you've ever thought much about this, but the simple truth is that the things that we really want, we tend to get, don't we? I mean, the stuff that we really want, somehow we will work and manage and operate or work or do whatever is necessary to get the things that we really, really want. And the issue is not, spiritually speaking, that we are not all that we could be. The problem for many of us is that, spiritually speaking, we don't want to be more than we are. We have as much of God as we want. We feel like, and we wouldn't say this to other people, but in our minds we tell ourselves, my ticket to heaven is punched. I know where my eternal destination is, and so that's taken care of. And so long as there's enough cushion in the pews, so long as the preacher doesn't talk too long, so long as the songs are kind of in keeping with our level of toleration, so long as there's prayer to fall back on when everything else seems to have not worked out, so long as Jesus makes me comfortable but doesn't exact any demands, call for any sacrifice, or demands any cost, well, then I'm okay with that. I've got as much of Him as I really want or need. But again, the things that we really want, we tend to get. I remember as a single guy, and I would, if asked, or even this was an active thought in my mind, I knew, and I would say, I would like to be a husband one day. I would like to be a father one day. But it was never until I decided, what, I really want to meet somebody, that God brought Caroline into my life. The things that we really want, we seem to somehow experience a way to achieve it. That which you really want, you're able to get. It's easy to talk about all the impediments and the roadblocks to folks going to college, but the truth is, if you really want to go to college, there are ways. The truth is, if you really want to make $1 million, it's not as impossible as you think. It all hinges on the want to. Having God close, real, fresh in your life, it all hinges on the want to, your desire. Is this what you really want? A few months ago, we looked at a passage in Philippians 3 where Paul starts by essentially giving his resume. It says, first of all, when I was born, I wasn't born just among any nation, among any people. I was born among God's people, the Jewish people. Of that nation, I was born into the tribe of Benjamin. As it concerns the law, he says, I was a Pharisee, circumcised on the 8th day. As it concerns zeal for the faith or for formal Jewish tradition, I persecuted the church. So he's describing all of this record of accomplishment, this record of commitment. But then he says in response to all of that, what things were gained to me, these I have counted loss for Christ. And then he expresses his desire, which is that I may know Him and the power of His resurrection and the fellowship of His sufferings. Not that I have already attained or am already perfected, I press on. Now here is somebody that is respected by the early church, deservedly respected by the early church. This is somebody that's deservedly respected by us. He's the greatest missionary in the history of the Christian church. This is a guy that the New Testament has 26 books, and God used Paul to write 13 of them. But he's saying, I haven't arrived. I haven't gotten there. I press on. To use Jesus' words, he hungered. He continued to thirst. The problem with this whole idea of spiritual hunger and spiritual thirst is that the only thing that we have to liken it to, and the only thing that we have to try to understand it, is the parallel, or what we think is the parallel between it and physical hunger and physical thirst. But the truth is, spiritual hunger and thirst works completely the opposite from physical hunger and thirst. Let me give you a couple of examples. If you are hungry, the longer you go without eating, the hungrier you get. If physically you are thirsty, the longer you go without drinking, the more thirsty you become. Spiritually speaking, the opposite is true. When you go without spiritual nourishment, when you go and are devoid of, and your life on a regular basis is devoid of the meat of God's Word, when your life is void of the quench, of the filling of His Spirit, well, what happens is that those cravings go away. Hunger, unsatisfied hunger, spiritually speaking, just evaporates. Your spiritual appetite simply disappears. The longer you go without eating physically or spiritually, the more your appetite wanes, and you get to the point where you just don't hunger anymore. Anyways, the reverse is also true. Physically, when you're hungry and you begin to eat, the more you eat, the more full that you become, and those feelings of hunger just go away. Physically, when you're thirsty and you begin to drink, the more you drink, the more that the thirst goes away. Spiritually speaking, the opposite is true. When you have genuine spiritual hunger, when you begin to receive spiritual nourishment, what it does is to awaken even more hunger. Yes, you get satisfied, but then you hunger for more. You begin to thirst for even more. In essence, the more you get of the Lord, the more that you come to want. Why is it that our relationships with Christ get to the point where they feel so stale? As though somehow we've lost God? Because for too many, if we're honest, we'd say we just quit wanting. I remember a few years ago, back when I was pastoring in Charlotte, I was sitting in my office one day and I was just kind of scanning my Bible looking for something to preach. And as I was doing so, I came across this passage here in Matthew. And I am absolutely very much a creature of routine and habit, and I genuinely appreciate the comfort that brings. I like having a predictable routine schedule. Some people hate ruts. Man, give me a good rut. I love it. But with that as backdrop, I was sitting there reading one day, and I don't know how many times I have read the Beatitudes before, but I get here to Matthew chapter 5, and all of a sudden, these words leapt off the page at me that day. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. And all of a sudden, it's as if the Lord really began to, not as if, but He began to speak to my heart. And I became aware of the truth about myself, which was that, man, I was spending a lot of time and effort and energy and doing a lot of busyness related to the work of ministry, to the work of pastoring, to the work of just getting my job done. And I would spend plenty of time preparing sermons and preparing Bible studies and dealing with administrative matters there at the church. And all of a sudden, it dawned on me, and God convicted me of the simple truth that I was spending all my efforts and energies preparing to say something to people like you, that I had no idea what He was saying to me. And I recognized, and it's as if it leapt off the page that day. And I remember this was my response to God. I'm reading that. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. And I told the Lord, whatever that is, I don't have it. Whatever that is, I don't have it. So you hear that. And I don't say that to you today as any measure of pride in my experience. I say that to say this. If it happens, and it does happen, to those whose job is the work of ministry, whose job is reading this book, whose job is teaching to people the truths of God's Word, if it happens to us, and it does, it happened to me, it can happen, and it does happen to each of us. It might have happened to you. So you say, well, Michael, it has. what did you do? More importantly, what is it that I can do? What's the cure to this? When you get to the point and you recognize, I have no spiritual appetite. When you say to God, this hungering and thirsting after righteousness, God, whatever that is, I don't have it. How do I get it? Well, my answer for you may sound kind of simple, but all I can say is from personal experience, I found it to be true. You got to start force-feeding yourself spiritually. You got to start force-feeding yourself spiritually. It's kind of like taking medicine that doesn't taste good. And the simple truth, when you have no spiritual appetite, the thought of sitting down and reading this and poring over these words and giving any measure of thought to them, well, you'd 1,000 times rather do anything else. Watch the football game, surf the internet, read another book, read a magazine, do anything. Your heart's not in it. Well, if you want these things to change, you've got to start force-feeding yourself. And you've got to say, you know what, I'm going to start reading this. And I'm going to start doing so with my mind engaged and actually paying attention to things that are said. And if you find yourself beginning to nod off and you can't maintain your train of thought, start reading out loud. Beyond that, it may very well be that in terms of your prayer life, that consists only of the blessing. Well, you got to start force-feeding yourself communication with God. And I don't mean merely just saying, okay, God, I'm going to give you these few moments or this period of time at this particular time during the day. I mean, begin and choose and make the decision. I'm going to be talking God throughout the course of my day. When I'm driving to work, when I'm walking from one class to another, when I'm cutting the grass, when I'm sitting behind my desk, when I'm driving home in the afternoon, just start talking to God. And it may very well be that you would 1,000 times rather be talking to somebody on the phone or listening to the radio or doing anything else. Start doing this. Start force-feeding yourself. And you know what I believe is going to happen for you? What began as a forced task becomes a chosen opportunity to seize. Why? Because what God will begin to do is to awaken a spiritual hunger and a spiritual thirst that might not have been there for years. And you'll find yourself initially saying, okay, I'm going to do this because I need to do this. I must do this. And you'll get to the point where you'll say, I'm doing this because I want to do this. I need this. I want this. I crave this. I hunger and thirst for this. Cravings for more of the Lord, His standards and His presence, they increase. Staleness is replaced with freshness. Apathy is replaced with passion. Flat is replaced with fizz. Now, I would say this to you as well. You have to continuously maintain that hunger. You've got to maintain that thirst, or in time, it's going to wane again. And you'll find yourself a period of months or a period of years later reading a verse like this and saying, whatever that is, I had it, but I have it no more. You've got to continue to hunger and continue to thirst. Let me see if I can paint a picture for you of what this looks like. Caroline and I have been married as of this past October 9 years. And we are living now in a very demanding season of life. And my schedule and responsibilities here at the church involve not just simply normal workday hours, but oftentimes things going on the nights and weekends. So there's a lot of responsibilities here at church for me. Caroline's got her fair share of responsibilities. She teaches a Sunday school class. She helps in the nursery. She teaches an Awana class. And so there's a lot going on involving us here at the church. Beyond that, Caroline homeschools our 3 boys. And on top of that, we've got 4 children, 2, 4, 6, and 8. Life is demanding. This is a busy season of life for us. With that as backdrop, it was a few months ago. As I recall, it was on a Saturday, and the little kids, we'd put them down for a nap. Nathan was upstairs reading, and Caroline and I were just sitting in the den just talking. And there was, as I recall, there was no precursor to this conversation. It just began, and Caroline started sharing with me her heart. And she said something along these lines. You know I love you, and I really do know that you love me. But sometimes I think back to what it was like when we were dating, and even those early years of marriage, and it was so clear to me. It was so expressive from you how much you loved me and how wanted you made me feel. And she said, I just want us to make sure that in the busyness and in the responsibilities of this stage of life, that we don't forget about that and wake up one day in our 50s and the kids are gone and we look at each other as roommates. And so hearing that, I thought, I need some time to think about this. And I need to talk to the Lord about this. And so I said, I'll be back in a little bit. I need to go to the church for a little bit. And so I came over here, and I just needed to talk to the Lord and think through what was going through my mind and tell the Lord what was on my mind and heart, though He already knew. And as I'm talking to the Lord, and I know in my heart that I love Caroline, and I want her to just not know, but overwhelmingly know that. And I'm thinking, what can I do that helps her stay in that state where she so knows that? And I remember all of a sudden it's as if God cut the light on in my dim mind, and I remembered something that I used to do. And that was back when we were dating and through at least the first year or so of marriage, every Wednesday I would write and send Caroline a poem. Nothing fabulous, no Shakespeare, no dramatics or anything, but just a poem that I had written that was an expression of my heart, sometimes sprinkled with what I thought was hilarious humor, but shared with her nonetheless. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, you know what matters most to Caroline, what is of greatest consequence to her, is my words to her. Those convey to her the depths of my heart, and that matters to her. It's not gifts, it's not stuff, it's my words. And so I decided I'm going to write her a poem. And so I wrote one that afternoon, and I took it home and I read it to her, and it meant so much. And that following Wednesday, I wrote another one and sent it. And the weeks after that, continued to send these to her every Wednesday morning. And these meant the absolute world to Caroline. She would get these things. She was just thrilled with these. I mean, honestly, it's a wonder we don't have 5 kids. I'm a great poet. Anyway, December came, and it was probably the first week or so in December. And now what had become my routine is that the first thing I do when I would get here on Wednesday mornings, I get here somewhere around 7:30 to 7:45. That'd be the first thing that I do is to write this to Caroline. And I had to be at the hospital first thing that morning, and so I didn't get a chance to write it. And I thought to myself, I'll write that this afternoon. But preparing the Bible study for that evening, I just didn't have a chance to. I thought I'll do it Thursday. Thursday came and went, and I didn't do it. Friday came and went, and I didn't do it. And so I thought, I'll catch it up next week. But then I just didn't do it. And so that week passed, and another week passed, and December passes, and I just never did it. January begins, week 1, week 2, week 3 come, and I still haven't done this. And this past Wednesday, I was sitting there, and all of a sudden, it's like the lights went on in my head, and I thought, you putz. This matters. Do this. And so I sat down, and I didn't know what I was going to say. I just started writing, and so this is what I said. We are here again in the middle of the week, but you didn't check your email, a poem to seek. Hopefully this comes then as a pleasant surprise to read of my wisdom with your beautiful eyes. Now, Catherine is, we call her Cat. And so I said, just the other week, our Cat turned 2. She's the fruit of me having devotions with you. If you don't get that, you're too spiritual. Her entrance into our lives was not really my plan. But her conception drove away doubt and fear like a van. It's such a blessing to have two women in my life, one for a daughter and one for a wife. I sometimes think of the woman she'll be and whether she'll be more like you or more like me. If I have a choice, I'd want her to be like you. I'd want her to live in ways you've chosen to do. I'm talking about having convictions that are strong and having patience with a husband that does run long. I'm talking about making choices that are best, not simply living and operating like all the rest. In realizing what is best, you know that is not cheap. The best demands a cost if real rewards you will reap. I want her to discover value and worth not in dollars and cents, that it's found in character that has no dents. I want her to see there is no greater prize than living for the Lord until she dies. I want her, when she is forced to choose, to pass on a career than her family lose. I want her, when choosing a husband, to not play a game, not settling for guys with short arms or those that are lame. Caroline used to date a guy with short arms. Clearly, that last part was quite the joke. Aren't you thankful that you decided with me to yoke? But what I'm talking about is deciding with criteria in mind, not falling for any poor schmuck she may happen to find. I want her to find a man who sees her as a gift from God, one who gives to the Lord more than a wink and a nod. I want her to be willing to fight for her marriage and to give us grandkids to push in a carriage. I want for her to not desire her children to be raised by the school, but to aspire a godly legacy, not merely kids deemed cool. I want her to have courage to speak truth to her man, to push him to achieve all that he can. I suppose it's on and on I could go, sharing desires that you already know. I could not love our little cat more than I do, which is why I hope she turns out like you. This is not a backhanded way to shower love on our child, rather to say something to you less direct and mild. I could pay to you no higher praise than to desire that others follow your ways. I wrote that and sent it, and then went into a meeting. And during that meeting, my cell phone rang, but I couldn't take the call. And so I could tell from the chime there was a voicemail. And I went to check the voicemail, and it was Caroline. And she's with a soft, broken voice. She says, I just wanted to say thank you. And with her broken voice, she says, I just wanted you to even hear it in my words, just how much that meant to me and how much I love you. You know what I'm going to do this Wednesday? I'm going to write me a poem. Why? Filling promotes greater hunger and greater filling, which promotes greater hunger and greater filling and greater hunger and greater filling. Jesus said, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. They will be filled. Hearing all that today, it leaves us with a simple question. It leaves you with a simple question. We got to start somewhere. So where is it that you start? I'll answer that question with a question. Here it is. You don't tell and don't have to tell anybody else the answer to this. You don't have to say it to your spouse, to your Sunday school teacher, to your preacher, to your kids, to your boss, to anybody. Just you and God. Do you have as much of Him right now as you really want? Do you right now have as much of Him as you really want? You've got two options. It can stay that way, or you can do something. What will you do? Bow your heads with me.